Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where we look at a member of my classic computer collection. And today we're going to have a look at the Commodore PET. So here's my PET. It's a slightly later model than the original Commodore PET, but the whole line is significant nonetheless. So let's have a look at it. The Commodore PET was conceived in the early half of 1977, and it came about this way. In 1975, Jack Trammell's company, Commodore, at that time selling calculators, had been burned by Texas Instruments when TI had raised the price of their CPU chips. TI chips were an essential part of Commodore calculators, so Commodore found itself frozen out of the market, unable to compete with TI's own calculators. Not wanting to be in that situation again, Jack Trammell decided to buy a chip manufacturing company outright. The company he acquired, MOS Technology, came with a computer pioneer, Chuck Peddle, chief designer of the soon-to-be very popular 6502 microprocessor. Chuck had already produced a computer kit, the KIM-1, and he convinced Jack to ditch calculators and move into microcomputers. Jack agreed, and Chuck and others designed the first PET model in time for the June 1977 Consumer Electronics Show in the US. The Commodore PET was one of 3 micros that were released that year, a group that had become known as the 1977 Trinity. These micros you could buy fully assembled, in a nice-looking case and all ready to go, with an operating system built in. They were the first consumer-friendly computers. This is what makes the model very significant from an historical point of view. Here is a close-up view of the machine. Officially, it is known as the PET 2001. The name PET is short for Personal Electronic Transactor, although I'm sure that its acronym is not accidental, being the same as a word which describes a loved domestic friend. It had 8K of RAM, a built-in data cassette recorder for program storage, and a calculator-like chiclet keyboard. The chiclet keyboard may have come from the fact that Commodore had been a calculator company, and that somehow chiclet keys were more appropriate on a computing device, or maybe it could have just been that they were cheaper to make. Anyway, the keyboard was hard to use, and it was soon replaced by a full-stroke one. The onboard tape device was relegated to an external peripheral. This revision is known as the 2001 N series, and it's one of these series that I own. When paired with disk drives, this PET could be used for business purposes. Here is a catalogue showing such a model, with its peripherals. You'll notice this flyer is in Italian, not English. Although being a US company, PET computers eventually found more success in Europe and other parts of the world than the US. There could be several reasons for this. Jack Trammell was a ruthless businessman, and he may not have had the best relationship with his US dealers. But it could be that both Apple and Tandy selling the TRS-80 Model 1, were not focused on the European market, leaving the field open for Commodore. So with that little bit of history, let's have a close look at the computer itself. It's a very handsome looking computer. It has a real retro late 1970s design with its angles and its screen on top. I really love that design. You can see there the keyboard. Note the PETSCI characters printed underneath on the keys there. Now, my model doesn't say Commodore PET 2001. On the front it says CBM Model 3032, which is the badge that these models were given in Europe. That's just a shot from the side. A very attractive looking micro. Here's the other side, and I've got this shot because I want to show you this slot down here. This is a card edge for memory expansion and other peripherals that might well have been made for the PET. But most of the time, if you had something plugged in, it was plugged in around the back here. From left to right, we have card edges that are for the data cassette, for a parallel printer, and the IEEE 488 interface for expansion. So various devices like the disk drives plugged into that particular card edge. At the back of the screen there, plenty of ventilation slots for air. We just zoom up on the badge. You can see there it is branded with its PET number, which is 2001 32 N. One of the things I love about these early PETs is the way that you can get into them, and it's very much like popping the hood on a car. You just lift it up, monitor included, you rest it on that special bar, and there you are. Everything's exposed, and you're ready to work on it. As easy as that. Brilliant. So let's have a look at the various bits and pieces, and we'll start over here on the left, and you'll see there's some fairly sizable components in this old computer. This dates back to 1979, this particular unit. Very large transformer, some huge capacitors there. Come to the board itself, these two rows in the front are RAM chips. You can see the second row is socketed. Very useful if a RAM chip happens to go bad. And sweeping down here, now those white sockets that you can see, that row of them, they contain the ROM chips. You can see we've got 4 ROM chips in here. We've got a few spare sockets for auxiliary ROMs if people wanted to put them in, and some large chips at the back, including the processor itself. You can see I've made a little repair there and just jumped a connection. These sockets tend to be quite unreliable once they've been used a bit, so they can break. Now there's one other bit of hardware I want to show you because it's always connected to my PET, and that is this device here. It's actually 2 separate cards, but they come as a pair. Now one of the difficulties in owning a PET is that it's very hard to find a disk drive for it. So this is a modern solution for that. Now you can Google these devices. They're called PET disks, and they're from bitfixer.com. And essentially what they do is give your Commodore PET a huge hard disk drive. The larger one that you can see on the left there goes into the IEEE 488 card edge, and it contains a micro SD card, and on that micro SD card you can put many programs. Now the smaller card on the right, that fits over the cassette card edge, and that gives you 2 standard cassette in and out ports rather than the special data cassette ones. And it also provides a 5-volt line which connects a power supply for the second card. So this is what it looks like when it's all hooked up. And you can see I've got a cable there going from the cassette card to the main card carrying that power supply. So you don't need to provide an external power source for it. Really good idea. And there's our micro SD card just tucked in its holder. So my cable's a bit long. It doesn't really need to be that long, but it's just tucked away behind the computer, and it works extremely well, as I'll show you in a minute. Right, so let's put the Commodore PET through its paces. So we'll switch on around the back. It boots straight into BASIC, even though it's got what it thinks is a hard drive attached. Unlike some of the other computers, such as the TRS-80 Model 1, the PET controlled its disk drives using BASIC. It wasn't a separate disk operating system, so it was just a matter of typing in the right commands and using the right sort of syntax. So those of you familiar with the Commodore 64 will recognize that command, that load command, and the syntax I used for it just then. So it's listing all of our programs now, and you can see there's a lot of them on this micro SD card. The BASIC was written by Microsoft, and apparently Commodore could use it for a number of years, or they might have even owned it outright, this particular version, and they could reuse it. But this almost exact same BASIC appeared in the Commodore 64 a few years later. Now the Commodore 64 was a much more advanced machine as far as hardware was concerned, but it had this rather lame version of BASIC in it. I think purely as a cost-cutting exercise, because Commodore had this version of BASIC from the PET days, and they could just throw it into the Commodore 64. So we've loaded our program up. I'm just listing it. You can see some of the pesky graphics in there. And it looks okay, so we'll run it. Now in this game, we are a one-person fire department, as it says. First thing it does is it says, do you want sound? I put yes in, but this particular version of PET actually doesn't have sound. So here we are, we're in a helicopter, we're loaded up with water, and we're travelling to our fire, which is on the left-hand side of the screen. So there's a building that's aflame there, and the idea is to drop quantities of water on this fire. Now, it's quite tricky. One of the reasons it's quite tricky is there's a considerable lag between the time you push a key to position your helicopter or drop your water to when that action's actually reflected on the screen. And of course, that's because the program's written in BASIC, so it's fairly slow in its execution. But that delay does make the game very challenging. You've almost got to think ahead and work ahead, knowing that there's going to be this lag that's going to essentially confound your actions. So you can see me moving over to the right there, still dropping my water on nothing. There's no fire there. But it's when I pushed the key to drop the water, I would have been over the fire. But it's just taken a while to come through. I've just jumped ahead in the game now, and you can see that my efforts haven't been very successful. You've actually got to get down quite low to put out all the fire. And what can happen if you don't put out all the fire, when you go back to reload, the fire actually spreads to the next building. So you can see that's exactly what's happening here, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So I do take some solace in the fact that at least I'm able to dock and get some more water. But I certainly don't put out that fire. Now, when the Commodore PET was released, one of its features was a full-screen editor. Now, this was something that wasn't common on micros at that particular time. And what I mean is that you could put the cursor over any word in your code that was visible on the screen, change that word, and the code would be updated. So we're going to change this word return to end, for example. It seems passé now, and it's, when the IBM PCs came out, if you got into BASIC, you could do this. But in 1977, this was pretty novel. There you can see we've changed our code. On then to manuals for the machine, and I've only got 2 of them. One of them is this one here. This is an Adam Osborne book. This is the PET CBM guide. It's more or less everything you need to know about your computer, and it's very comprehensive and quite full. Not only does it deal with the various bits and pieces on your machine, and in fact all the variations up to that point, but it explains a lot about the computer science behind it. So it's a lot of explanation about the PET graphics, for example. You can learn BASIC by reading through here. It talks about the various basic commands. Pretty comprehensive. Talks about the disk drives, different keyboard layouts and the different models, screen dimensions. You can see that my particular version is not in very good condition. In fact, the bindings are coming apart, so it is one that I'm looking to replace at some stage, or maybe get rebound. The pages themselves are in quite good condition, but it's just the binding is coming to bits. So it's an essential book if you have a PET, one of these early models. Will tell you all you need to know about it. Here's the second book, and I like this book. It's not a self-contained book as such. It actually is a series of newsletters and articles from the Commodore PET Users Club in the UK. It's fascinating. It's full of program listings, tips, techniques, thoughts, hardware articles, how to build various interfaces, get your PET on the IEEE 488 bus. It's a reflection of computing as it was in the hobby days. This is the period 1975 to the early 80s when people were exploring the machines themselves. So although they could do interesting things, a lot of people were interested in the hardware and the machines to see if they could extend them, do creative things with them, and essentially have fun with them. So the writing in the book and the articles, letters, etc., do reflect that time of computing. And there you can just see some of the subjects covered in the book. Yes, good to have. So what are some final thoughts about the Commodore PET? Well, I love having one. Commodore PETs are unique. They're one of those very early microcomputers. that were around in the late 1970s. And generally pet owners tend to love these machines. The Vintage Computer Forum's a website, community group on the internet, and within that site there are a number of pet owners, and they support other pet users and generally continue to have a lot of fun with their machines. For example, this photo is from an event that was held a few years ago. It was called Pet Alive, and it was a celebration of the Commodore PET, and for a week or so people could dress their pets up or video them doing certain things, and there were competitions, so you could have the best dressed pet, you could have the best behaved pet, very similar to, say, real pet competitions when you're talking about cats and dogs. Here's my particular entry. This is my pet dressed up, but it's just a reflection of how people enjoy their machines and really love their pets. And it is true, they are regarded with a lot of affection by the people that own them. So I hope you enjoyed that look at the Commodore PET. So until next time, keep well, and we'll see you in the next video.